Let's take a look at some market news now. Asian shares reversed losses this morning and moved back towards a 3-week top as China's persistent efforts to cushion the blow from a coronavirus outbreak calmed nervous investors. Although Japanese stocks faltered on growing recession risks, trading is expected to be light as US stocks and bond markets will be shut on Monday for public holiday. The gains were largely held by Chinese shares, with a blue chip index there jumping 2% after the country's central bank lowered one of its key interest rates and injected more liquidity into the system. Also whetting risk appetite was an announcement by China's finance minister on Sunday that Beijing would roll out targeted and phased tax and fee cuts. The Nikkei in Japan lost almost 0.7% to close at 23,523 points. The Hang Seng is, however, in the green, climbing just over 0.5% to end the day at 27,971. The biggest gainer was the Shanghai Composite Index, which added 2.3% to close at 2,938 points. The S&P ended most modestly higher last Friday following strong earnings from some companies and a report late in the session that the White House was considering a tax incentive for Americans to buy stocks. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 0.1% to 29,397 points, while the S&P 500 gained 0.2% to 3,380 points. The Nasdaq Composite also added 0.2% to close at 9,731 points. Let's get more on the markets now. Arabile Gumede is standing by for us at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Some good news coming out of China. Arabile, what's happening with us?
Yeah, well, we're certainly getting a bit of a good taste out of that market feel. 0.4% higher as well for the JSE All Share today. So thus far in lunchtime trading, we are faring quite well. That coronavirus still, of course, of massive impact. Some impetus being thrown into the market then as the Chinese economy tried to perhaps tilt things in a more positive favor for consumers, changing down perhaps some of its interest rates there as well. Unfortunately, though, the Japanese economy did languish, not doing too well then in that final quarter of last year. That does mean then that they could face a recession, considering then that the coronavirus has certainly impacted things in the first quarter of this year as well. Then last year, a lot of that impact did come through from that sales tax hike and of course the typhoon that did hit Japan. So things are a little bit weary on that front. So that is bound to impact the rest of the world. Remember, that is the third largest economy as well, which does get impacted. On the local front, well, we're chasing some equity news then. Of course, a lot of big news having come through, a lot from the miners really. Of course, just last week having heard Sibanye Stillwater really saying that they're hoping to get a 433 million rand profit for the interim period that was to end December. Of course, the big news this afternoon then is the news that has come out early this morning that Chris Griffith, the Anglo Platinum CEO, will be stepping down after around 7.5 odd years at the helm of that company. We'll get to chat to him at 2 o'clock. But for now, let's check in on how the markets are faring in general. Then we'll get into the details right after this. Let's get right into the discussion now, and Gary Boyson from Ransus joins us right here, basically in his office at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Gary, thank you so much for the time. A little bit of a better picture as well to start off the week. Any particular reason, anything we kind of attesting it to? It's not the biggest movement either.
I think it's certainly got to do with the Chinese monetary stimulus that was announced this morning. Our market is being dominated by equity headlines. So, as you mentioned, some miners reporting. We've had likes of Bidcorp and Discovery also reporting. So that really affecting individual share prices. But overall markets being lifted, partly I think because there's going to be lower liquidity tonight as well with the US closed for President's Day. Yeah. I know our offshore transfer business can't settle today at least because dollar-based markets, so the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ will be closed as well as some of the money markets. But really this is all to do with Chinese stimulus. If the Chinese central bank at least is trying to, I suppose, limit the impact of the damage of the coronavirus is doing, especially in financial markets. And we really knew they were pursuing open market operations, so they were buying Chinese assets and today announcing obviously further monetary stimulus, which really just helped to lift Asia this morning and is feeding through into Europe and South Africa.
How long can they keep going with this process though? I mean, how long can they just keep on pumping into that economy to try and boost the stimulus and try and maintain growth levels above 6%?
A long time. So they can continue for a long time, and that's always going to be the role of central banks because they control the currency. The problem is that when you use monetary policy tools rather than fiscal tools to manipulate real economic growth, they have limited power. So they can continue to try, but you almost get that law of diminishing marginal return. So the more often you use it, the less effective the policy becomes. Sure. But at this stage, I think the Chinese central bank certainly still has a lot of ammunition. They have a lot of room to work, and they with the triple R cuts that they use, it's very different to the way that say Western central banks work. So they do potentially have other alternative tools that are not available to other economies.
Very quickly, let me throw you off just a touch. State of the Nation was last week, but what do you make of the sense of the economic sort of elements that we try to add there? Everything from a state bank right through to having sort of a fund as well to try and boost things along. Kind of a positive sentiment, a sentiment where we're trying to get things done, or do you feel like, well, we're going for things that aren't going to work?
No, I don't know. I thought it was actually a fairly decent State of the Nation speech. So, and then I went on Twitter and realized, and I just saw the absolute depression. And I think the idea of getting opening up power generation to IPPs is incredibly important. The big factor constraining the South African economy is Eskom at the moment. So coming up with a workable solution there is absolutely critical. I also like the idea of introducing coding and programming into junior school education curriculums, because I think that really that's the future of South Africa more than anything else, is getting our primary education system right. Far more important than high-speed trains and other more 100%. Exciting things. So I thought fairly good. I think the public would disagree, and I think there was a little bit of spectacle with the EFF as well.
Do you think a state bank is plausible in our current economy?
Again, there's a lot of politics around that, so I don't know if I'd be qualified to answer it. But at this stage, state bank probably not something that I'd be going for. Yeah.
All right. Let's get into the big equity news of the day then, of course. Chris Griffith stepping down as CEO of Anglo Platinum. He joined and Smack Bang started on the 1st of September 2012. That was in the middle of the Marikana massacre. 2 years later, he had the unfortunate time where we had the longest strike in the platinum sector, a whole 5 months, 10.6 billion lost just in wages alone, more than, I think, 224 billion rand also lost just in production. And then he had to cut jobs on top of that to try and restructure this entity. Today, they reported 33% spike in revenue. He's done a good job in turning it around.
I think he's done a fantastic job in turning it around, and it just goes to show. Again, we bring it back to. If you I attended the results this morning, and it's just amazing the amount of revenue that's being lost because of uncertain electricity supply. Sure. It's not easy in terms of electricity. Certainly, our labour regulation has been incredibly difficult. Labour relations, especially in the platinum sector, have been very, very, very difficult. But it just goes to show that if you work together, if you have strong leadership at a company, just what can be achieved. And despite, I suppose, a very, very difficult environment, they've managed to turn around. They've managed to, offload non-core operations. They've managed to get their debts under control. They've put the business on a very, very solid footing, and the shareholders are now finally reaping the benefit of, I think, 7 very, very hard years. He says, now this is kind of the pinnacle of his of his efforts, and it's time for him to step down. And he certainly thinks that there's more upside for the business.
But, do you think so?
I do. Yeah, I was chatting to our old platinum analyst earlier this morning, and I said, especially if you look at the PGM basket, so you look at the likes of rhodium and palladium, their prices have just gone absolutely parabolic. It's straight up. I said, how much more can we get here? So the market's still in deficit. The deficit it's growing. You look at actual the demand that's coming out of auto catalytic converters. The car markets internationally are actually in the doldrums. So if they turn around as well, you'll actually see more demand for platinum. And we're not bringing on new mines. And the point is that you're still going to have a supply crunch. So I think platinum, like PGM basket prices, can still go higher, and that is going to feed into the bottom line of these companies, especially when you have a company like Amplats that's been focusing on something like Mogalakwena, which is a highly mechanized mine as well. The cost of producing ounces is low, and the price of your ounces is going up when you sell them. So I think these companies are still very, very well positioned.
So good time to leave then. Everything looks to be on the up, so just let it go and say, hey, when I left, everything was going great, right?
That's it. He still says he's got 2 appointments left, and I think he's 55 years old. He's still got time for other positions.
I wonder what positions these might be. The last time we had a CEO leave a top 40 company, we had an SOE in particular getting that head. All right. The sustainability, I suppose, of the business and the sector is now going to be called into question. He had a massive fight with the likes of Susan Shabangu, who was then a mines minister as well. We've now entered a phase, I suppose, where there's still uncertainty because Gwede Mantashe seems to be lacking a sense of communication, a sense of urgency, a sense of wanting to actually make the sector a little bit more secure. Do you think the next CEO has a tough task ahead at the helm?
I don't think any CEO of any platinum company in South Africa has an easy task ahead of them. And certainly I think, with, you mentioned, I mean, obviously there have been announcements now that companies are going to be allowed to, especially mining companies, are going to be allowed to generate their own power. That Gwede Mantashe announced that at the mining in Durban, and that I think is very, very positive for the industry as a whole, because these are very, very heavy energy users. I mean, to run a smelter is incredibly energy intensive. So if they can create their own power solutions, I mean, I think that's fantastic. If you look at kind of the labour and the regulatory environment in South Africa, we'd love to have some more policy certainty, but it comes with the territory. I mean, it would be lovely if South Africa was an easier business to do, easier destination to do business in, but at the same time, I still think there's a lot of opportunity here.
Sibanye Stillwater seems to be making the most out of it, though. They seem to get from a loss now possibly a profit.
And I mean, it's maybe a little bit unfair because a lot of Sibanye's revenue is now coming from offshore. But if you think about the genesis of this company, Neil Froneman, it was the spin out of Goldfields. He took the old South African, the assets that Goldfields didn't want. And I mean, look at what he's managed to do with them. I mean, using those assets, repurposing them, managing them more effectively, managed to build, like, in my opinion, one of the most impressive miners listed on the local exchange, certainly today. So, you look at what's happened to the share price recently, you look at the numbers that came out on Friday, you've got most analysts, I mean, the share price has been really ramping up after the buyout from of DRD. But we saw analysts now upgrading, it was around 30 Rand a share, upgrading their target prices to about 55 Rand a share. Jesus. So this looks like an incredibly positive, good news story. But Neil Froneman, again, the way that he's worked with the market, the way that he's worked with the unions, the reputation that he's got, I think it's about labour and business also just kind of understanding that there is, we each need each other, and without some sort of compromise, everyone suffers. So I think overall it's positive.
On the spot, you have to pick one. Who's the best CEO between the two, Neil Froneman, Chris Griffith?
I can't answer that.
I'd
probably go. It's a very, very difficult question. Very different environments that they've operated on. I can't knock Chris Griffiths for an amazing 7 years that he's had at Amplats, but Neil Froneman I've always respected. I mean, I think he's done amazing things.
So you're going Neil Froneman?
Probably, if you put a gun to my head, it's Neil Froneman. Yes.
Gary, appreciate the time, but thank you so much. Gary Boyson there from Ransus helping us unpack that market movement, I suppose. We'll chat to Chris Griffith then at the top of the hour, really about his tenure and really just what he sees as still great potential for the platinum mining industry. For now, though, we cross back, of course, to our studios in Auckland.